2.5 Skyactiv-G turbo, PY-VPTS 231 horsepower. Under the hood of the Mazda CX-9 there is one uncontested engine. Inline-4 2.5 turbo, which produces 231 horsepower, and if the car is imported from abroad, then 250 horsepower. This engine has a light alloy cylinder block, timing chain drive, and direct fuel injection. Its compression ratio is 10.5 to 1. Unlike the naturally aspirated Skyactiv-G, this engine does not operate on the Miller-Atkinson cycle. It has only one turbine, but the exhaust gases are supplied to it by a curious 431 type exhaust manifold. Those 4 channels are combined into 3, and then into one common channel, after the turbine. This improves purging and prevents back pressure from gases emitted by adjacent cylinders. The turbine hot end inlet flange has 3 inlet ports. In general, all turbines usually have one channel for supplying exhaust gases, or 2 for twin-scrolled turbines. So, in this Mazda turbo engine, the exhaust gases enter the turbine impeller through 3 channels. Moreover, each of these 3 channels is divided into 2 more, a very narrow and a full-size one, which is blocked by a separate damper. Actually, all 3 large channels are blocked by a common damper. Such a mechanism with a damper simply changes the cross-section of the channels through which gases pass to the turbine. If you are asking why it is impossible to make a regular geometry, then we inform you that the turbines of gasoline engines almost never have a variable gas guide geometry. This is all for diesels only. Literally a couple of gasoline engines have variable geometry, like diesel engines. If anyone knows what engines we are talking about, write in the comments. In general, thanks to such a simple and effective solution by changing the cross-section of the exhaust gas channels, Mazda engineers were able to ensure energetic spin-up of this turbine at the lowest speeds. Narrow intake channels accelerate the flow of gases. And at high speeds, the gases spin the turbine without interfering with each other. The geometry damper is opened by a vacuum actuator, and the bypass valve in the hot part is controlled by an electromechanical servo drive. Surely you are interested in the reliability of the Skyactiv-G turbo motor. This engine has been produced since 2015, and nothing bad has happened to it at all during this time. At all. Its reliability is outstanding. The timing chain easily lasts more than 200,000 kilometers. With such mileage, you may be asked to replace the ignition coil. The original ones will cost $130, PY-01 250, but there are many replacements starting at $30. There are rare cases where one of the injectors, PY-01 250, leaks. The original one will cost $330. There are also isolated cases of cracks appearing in the cylinder head, and then against the background of outright overheating of this engine. 6-street automatic transmission FW6XL. All Mazda CX-9 are equipped with 6-speed automatically. This is an Aisin product based on the U660 transmission. This is indeed a very reliable transmission, but owners of heavy turbocharged Mazda CX-9s can put it down in 100 to 150,000 kilometers. Firstly, this automatic cannot tolerate overheating. A dirty heat exchanger can put an end to the fate of this transmission. The original heat exchanger should be changed at the 100,000 kilometers mark, and the system should be equipped with a separate radiator for ATF cooling. Secondly, this machine has a weak central support bearing. Increased loads cause play in it, and then in the clutch packs. Thirdly, constant aggressive driving wears out the high/low drum clutches. The filter, FZ01 of this transmission is accessible after removing the pan. It can be changed every 2 oil changes. Every 50,000 kilometers it is worth partially changing the ATF, which will extend the life of the valve body and the transmission as a whole. This replacement will require 5 liters of FC-type oil. The electromagnetic clutch of the rear axle is rather weak and sooner or later begins to hum. On the Mazda CX-9, this happens up to a mileage of 100,000 kilometers, even if this crossover has never left the asphalt. In the clutch itself, both of its support bearings wear out, the lubricant in them dries out, where products and work of the clutch pack are added. But more often a different situation occurs. Water gets into the coupling. The fact is that a tube comes out of the coupling body on the right side. There is a hose attached to it that stretches to the trunk floor on the right side. This tube goes into the lowest point of the trunk floor and is not covered in any way. Water that collects in the trunk due to spills or seepage during rain flows freely into the coupling through the hose. In addition, the gearbox can drink water through its breather. It is located at the top of the gearbox at the back. It sucks up water if the car sits in a deep enough puddle for a while. If an error message appears on the instrument panel indicating a malfunction of the all-wheel drive, then most likely the power wire to the electromagnet for engaging this clutch has broken. The wires enter the coupling from above a little to the right. As a rule, they tear, as they say, at the root at the rubber sealing insert. But this problem is being repaired. In winter, there are situations when even a small amount of moisture in the coupling evaporates, and then condenses in it and freezes. In this case, the magnet freezes to the clutch drum, and at the moment of movement it turns it. In this case, the wires break off at the root already inside the coupling. Let's return to the rear gearbox. It may hum due to wear on all four of its bearings. This is a pair of bearings, KA0327-210 and KA0327-220, of the input shaft, drive gear, and a pair of identical bearings, KA0327-350, of the drive gear. The problem is that the original bearings are ball, not roller, and their quality leaves much to be desired. In addition to the hum, a sure sign of wear on the differential bearings is oil leaking through the seals of the rear drives. In general, if something on the bottom of this crossover starts to hum, or if there are twitches and kicks when starting and turning, then the car needs to be taken to have the bearings replaced. There are specialized workshops on this issue. Most likely they will take your humming clutch and reflector into account and install a restored one on your car. Please ensure that good quality roller bearings are installed in the gearbox. With them, the rear axle coupling will most likely never hum. You can change the oil in the rear and angular gearboxes. 1 liter can of Mazda SG1 is enough to change the oil in both gearboxes. Many owners of Mazda CX-9 crossovers have encountered and continue to experience brake disc runout. The front brake discs are frankly rather weak. Literally 1 to 2 emergency braking at high highway speeds leads to their overheating and deformation. Often brake discs were replaced under warranty, but a new set of original discs became deformed again under heavy braking. There are several options for non-original discs that are more durable. Some CX-9 owners have installed higher performance brakes with 6-piston calipers, for example. There are no obvious weak points in the suspension, but its parts last less than on the lighter CX-5. Original front suspension arms are terribly expensive, over $600 apiece, TM 5234 350A. There are no replacements, but you can find an aftermarket ball joint for $20, $30. The front suspension silent block, TK4834 470A, is detailed separately as price does not exceed $30. Replacing the front suspension arms will be necessary after a mileage of 100,000 kilometers. Front stabilizer struts last about 40,000 kilometers and cost no more than $35, KD 3534 170. The rear suspension has 4 levers. The original silent blocks for it are not sold separately from the levers. The exception is the silent blocks of the upper boomerang arms, TK4828 450, which cost $30. Trailing arms, TK4828 200A assemblies cost up to $200. Wheel bearings for Mazda CX-9 are sold only as originals. There are no replacements. Front wheel bearings, TK48 3304X, today cost $450, and they can fail after a mileage of about 100,000 kilometers, especially if the owner likes to drive on the highway at speeds much higher than 120 kilometers per hour. Rear wheel bearings, TK502615X, sell for $300. Mazda's body paint is very thin. It is easily pierced by pebbles and easily scratched even with the most careful and gentle body washes. There is no rubber molding on the leading edge of the roof panel, so frequent highway trips leave chips here, which quickly turn red and then swell. In a good way, the entire frontal projection of this crossover should be protected with anti-gravel film. This is not the first time we have reviewed Mazda crossovers. The CX-5 crossovers of 2 generations from our reviews were remembered for the total, albeit superficial, corrosion of the entire bottom subframes and suspension parts. In general, reagents and moisture leave an indelible mark on these machines over 2 to 3 winters. Yes, corrosion in the first 5 to 7 years will progress only on the bottom, but it is still worth fighting it with special anti-corrosion compounds. Just like on the CX-5 crossover, on the older CX-9 there are cases of corrosion of the rear door opening servo housings. The paint swells both on the outside of the cabinets and the internal rods rust. Because of this, the door swings open and closes with a creak. But more often, after 5 years of operation, a wiring to the servos breaks. It breaks in the corrugation, and a break can also occur inside the servo itself. Like other Mazdas, the CX-9 also has a problem with the mirror folding mechanism. The mechanism, as a rule, stops working in the fall and spring. The reason is that the lubricant is washed out of the plastic hinge, and then the motor in the servo drive cannot fold or unfold the mirror dry. To solve this problem, Mazda has already released the 3rd revision of the repair kit, GRY06915ZC, and it is advisable to add more grease to it before installation.